They thought I was a fool until my dog uncovered something they were willing to kill for.
Oh, they laughed when the broad-shouldered veteran with moss-green eyes handed over his last $3 for a rotting heap of wood. They called it the dumbest trade in Idaho history. But while the town saw ruin, William Wynn's K-9 partner, Smoky, smelled a secret buried so deep it would soon bring the entire valley to its knees. The wind howling off the Sawtooth Mountains felt like a jagged blade against William Wynn's sun-kissed, rugged skin, standing at a towering height with powerful broad shoulders. The 50-year-old veteran looked like a statue carved from the mountain itself. His military buzz cut, a salt and pepper blend of resilience, bristled in the cold, with a square jawline and a short box beard streaked with silver. William stood among the crowd at the Jenkins estate sale. His deep moss-green eyes narrowed, watching the mockery. Beside him, Smoky, a 30 kilograms powerful German shepherd, sat in an athletic, fierce posture. The black and tan K-9 operative didn't care about the auctioneer's jokes. Smoky's ears flicked, his intense gaze fixed not on the flashy ranch equipment, but on a vine-strangled mini cabin at the edge of the woods. While others bid on tractors, William stepped forward, his boots crunching on the frost. He reached into his pocket, pulling out 3 crumpled dollar bills, his last connection to the world of the living. $3. William's voice was a low rumble, cracking like dry earth. The auctioneer snickered. Sold to the man with the dog for the price of a coffee. As the crowd erupted in laughter, Smoky let out a low, guttural vibration. He knew something they didn't. He had already caught the scent of old steel and forgotten history beneath those rotting floorboards. If you believe in the bond between a veteran and his loyal dog, hit that like button right now and subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories of discovery. William walked toward his new home, his powerful jawline set in a grim line. Each step emphasized his muscular build, the movement of a man who had spent decades navigating war zones. The deep forehead wrinkles and crow's feet around his moss-green eyes told a story of survival. But today, he felt the weight of every one of his 50 years. The tiny cabin was a disaster. Broken windows, a sagging roof, and a door that hung like a broken wing. The townspeople continued to point and film on their phones, mocking the veteran who had traded his last meal for a shack. But Smoky was already in operative mode. The German shepherd didn't wait for an invitation. He lunged toward the cabin door, his black and tan coat bristling with sudden energy. His expression was aggressive, his nose pressed hard against the threshold. As William pushed the creaking door open, a wave of stale, frozen air hit them. Inside, it was empty, or so it seemed. Smoky ignored the dust and the cobwebs. He moved to the center of the small room, his fierce posture lowering as he began to pace in a tight circle. Suddenly, the dog stopped. He began to dig, his powerful claws toward the ancient wooden planks with a frantic, rhythmic scraping. William watched, his pulse quickening. He knew that look. Smoky only dug like that when he found something that wasn't supposed to exist. "What is it, boy?" William whispered, kneeling down, his large, callous hands resting on the vibrating floor. The scraping sound of Smoky's claws echoed in the tiny space, a stark contrast to the whistling wind outside. William reached down, his broad shoulders blocking the dim light from the broken window. He felt the floorboards. One was loose, vibrating under the dog's intense focus. With a grunt of effort, William wedged his fingers into the gap. The wood groaned and splintered, protesting after decades of silence. As the board came free, Smoky barked, a sharp, military-grade alert that signaled fine. Beneath it would sat a heavy, industrial steel hatch. It was painted a faded olive drab, the unmistakable color of 1940s military hardware. A recessed handle, rusted but solid, waited in the shadows. William stared, his moss-green eyes reflecting the dull glint of the metal. This wasn't a farmer's root cellar. This was engineered. The deep wrinkles on his forehead deepened as he realized the cabin was merely a camouflage for whatever lay beneath. Outside, the mocking voices of the townspeople grew louder. A black SUV rolled up. Harold Burke, the local wealthy investor, stepped out with a smirk. "Hey, Win, need a loan for some paint? Or are you waiting for the dog to find buried treasure?" he shouted, his voice dripping with condescension. William didn't look up. He kept his hand on Smoky's head, feeling the dog's muscles quivering with excitement. The veteran's square jaw tightened. He wasn't just a homeless man anymore. He was a reconnaissance specialist who had just stumbled onto the biggest secret in the Sawtooth Mountains. He gripped the steel handle, his muscular arm tensing as he prepared to reveal what had been hidden for 80 years. With a violent metallic shriek that sounded like a scream, the hatch finally yielded. A gust of air, colder and more ancient than the Idaho winter, rushed up from the darkness. It smelled of oil, old paper, and something metallic. Smoky didn't hesitate. The 30 kilograms K9 lunged into the opening, disappearing into the blackness before William could even grab his flashlight. "Smoky, hold," William commanded, his voice echoing in the hollow space below. William clicked on his tactical light. The beam cut to the dark, revealing a narrow concrete stairway. He descended slowly, his tall frame forced to hunch in the confined space. At the bottom, he found himself in a reinforced bunker. This was a signal corps station from World War II, a forgotten relic of the Pacific War era, hidden deep in the American interior. Steel cabinets lined the walls, and a massive radio console sat in the corner, encrusted in dust. Smoky was standing at the far end of the room, his black and tan coat shimmering in the flashlight's glare. He was guarding a small, locked metal box bolted to a concrete pedestal. The dog's expression was loyal and fierce, his eyes locked on the prize. William approached, his heart hammering against his ribs. He brushed the dust off the top of the box, revealing a seal, U.S. Department of the Interior, Mineral Survey, top secret. His mind raced. Why would a mineral survey be classified as top secret? As he looked around the room, he saw geological maps of the valley pinned to the walls, covered in red circles. Every circle was a location on this very property. William knelt beside the pedestal, his moss-green eyes scanning the maps. He realized that the worthless land he had just purchased for $3 wasn't just dirt and pine trees. The red circles indicated deposits of rare earth minerals, materials essential for modern technology, defense systems, and energy. In 1944, the government had found them but buried the data to keep it out of enemy hands. And then, through some bureaucratic error or intentional cover-up, the station had been forgotten. Smoky nudged William's hand, his tail thumping against the concrete. The dog had sensed the significance of this place before a single human had even considered it. William opened the metal box using a small pry bar he found on a workbench. Inside were leather-bound journals and core samples, shimmering rocks that caught the light, trapped stars. These samples were the proof. This land was worth millions, perhaps hundreds of millions. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed from above. The hatch light was blocked by a shadow. Harold Burke was peering down, his smug face replaced by a look of stunned greed. "Win, what the hell is down there?" he called out, his voice shaking. William stood up, his broad shoulders filling the corridor. He looked at Smoky, who let out a low, protective growl. The veteran's moss-green eyes were hard as flint. "Nothing you can afford, Harold," William replied, his voice cold and steady. He knew the fight was just beginning. The town that had mocked him would now try to steal from him. But they forgot one thing. William Wynn was a soldier, and Smoky was AK-9, who never surrendered his post. The news of the underground bunker spread to the town of Stanley like a wildfire in a dry canyon. By the next morning, the quiet road leading to William's mini cabin was no longer empty. Shiny SUVs and pickup trucks lined the gravel path. William stood on the small, warped porch, his tall, muscular frame casting a long shadow. His moss-green eyes were sharp, scanning the crowd like he was back on a long-range reconnaissance patrol. Smoky sat beside him, his black and tan coat sleek in the morning sun. The dog's posture was fierce, his eyes tracking every movement of the strangers. People who had laughed at William just 24 hours ago were now holding thermoses of coffee and friendly smiles. Harold Burke stepped forward again, this time accompanied by a man in a sharp suit carrying a briefcase. "William, buddy," Harold started, his voice dripping with fake warmth. "We heard you found some old military junk down there. I brought an appraiser. We're willing to take this whole mess off your hands for, let's say, $5,000. That's a huge profit on your $3. William's square jaw tightened. He didn't say a word. He just looked at the appraiser, then back at Harold. The deep crow's feet around his eyes crinkled as he let out a short, dry laugh that silenced the crowd. "The property isn't for sale, Harold," William said, his voice a low, commanding rumble that seemed to vibrate in the cold air. Smoky let out a sharp, punctuating bark, backing up his partner's statement. The man in the suit stepped forward, trying to peer past William into the cabin. "Mr. Wynn, you don't understand the legalities of abandoned military sites. You could be in a lot of trouble holding on to government property." William stepped down from the porch, his broad shoulders squared. Despite his 50 years, he moved with the predatory grace of AK-9 operative. "I bought the land and everything on it. The deed is clear," William replied, his moss-green eyes locking onto the lawyer's gaze until the man looked away. The townspeople began to murmur. They weren't just curious anymore. They were hungry. They had seen the photo Cynthia Burke had posted online of the glittering rock samples. They didn't see a veteran looking for a home. They saw a gold mine protected by a man they thought had nothing left. William realized he was no longer just surviving the winter. He was defending a fortress. He looked at Smoky and signaled with a subtle hand movement. The German shepherd immediately began a slow, methodical patrol of the cabin's perimeter, his aggressive expression warning anyone against stepping onto the property. As the sun dipped behind the Sawtooth Mountains, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange, William prepared for a long night. He didn't trust the silence of the town. He sat inside the cabin, the heavy steel hatch locked from the inside. The only light came from a small camping lantern, casting long, dancing shadows against the wooden walls. William ran a whetstone over a small pocket knife. The rhythmic SHHHH sound the only thing keeping the silence at bay. Smoky wasn't resting. The powerful German shepherd was huddled near the door, his head low, ears twitching at every snap of a frost-covered branch outside. Suddenly, Smoky's body stiffened. A low, vibrating growl started deep in his chest, a sound William knew meant contact. Someone was outside. William extinguished the lantern. In the absolute darkness, his senses sharpened. He heard the muffled crunch of boots on snow and the whisper of a crowbar sliding against the window frame. They thought the old veteran was an easy target. They thought a $3 cabin wouldn't have a security system. They forgot about the 30 kilograms of muscle and teeth currently baring its fangs in the dark. The window shattered with a sharp crack. A gloved hand reached through the jagged glass, fumbling for the lock. William didn't move. He didn't have to. "Smoky, watch," he whispered. The German shepherd launched like a black and tan bolt of lightning. There was no barking, only the terrifying sound of a predator in flight. A scream erupted from outside as Smoky's powerful jaws met the intruder's sleeve. It wasn't about drawing blood. It was about absolute dominance. William stepped to the window, his moss-green eyes cold as the Idaho ice. Outside, two men in dark hoodies were scrambling back toward a waiting truck, one of them clutching an arm that had been thoroughly mauled by Smoky's grip. "Next time," William shouted into the night, his voice carrying the weight of a battlefield commander. "I won't tell him to hold back." The truck roared to life, tires spinning in the snow as it fled down the gravel road. William looked down at Smoky, who was standing by the broken window, his fierce posture unchanged, waiting for the next threat. William reached out and scratched the dog behind the ears. "Good work, partner," he murmured, but his forehead wrinkles deepened. He knew this was only the first wave. Smoky is doing an amazing job protecting William. Give him a good boy in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to see if they can hold the fort. By morning, the broken window was boarded up with scrap wood, but the atmosphere in Stanley had turned toxic. William drove his old pickup into town to get some gauze for a small cut on Smoky's paw, but the local hardware store owner refused to serve him. "You're bringing trouble to this valley when," the man said, leaning over the counter. "Burke says you're sitting on a national security risk." "The sheriff's been getting calls all night." William stood tall, his broad shoulders filling the doorway. He could feel the eyes of the townspeople on him, judgmental, greedy, and fearful. He walked back to his truck, where Smoky was waiting in the cab, his aggressive expression keeping the onlookers at a distance. As he started the engine, he saw the sheriff's cruiser pulling up behind him. Sheriff Miller, a man William had once respected, stepped out. "William, we need to talk about that cabin," Miller said, his hand resting near his belt. "The town council just held an emergency meeting. They're moving to seize the property under eminent domain." William's jaw tightened until it felt like stone. They weren't even hiding it anymore. They wanted the treasure, and they were willing to use the law to crush a man who had given his life for it. William looked at the sheriff, then at Smoky. "You can tell the council one thing," William said, his moss-green eyes flashing with a dangerous light. "I've defended harder ground than this with a lot less." The atmosphere in the Sawtooth Mountains turned as cold as the ice forming on the Salmon River. William would return to his $3 cabin to find a formal notice pinned to the gate. Property condemned. Immediate vacancy required. The town council, led by the greedy Harold Burke, had moved faster than William anticipated. They were using safety concerns over the old military bunker as a legal smokescreen to seize the land. William stood in the center of his small clearing, his broad shoulders squared against the biting wind. He wasn't the kind of man to retreat. His moss-green eyes surveyed the perimeter, identifying the high ground and the natural choke points. He began to set up a non-lethal defensive line. Beside him, Smoky paced with a fierce, athletic energy. The German shepherd sensed the rising stakes. His ears were constantly swiveling, picking up the distant sound of engines approaching. William didn't need a lawyer to tell him this was a siege. He reached into his truck and pulled out a crate of old tactical supplies, smoke canisters, and high-decibel alarms he had kept from his service days. "They think we're just an old man and a dog, Smoky," William muttered, his square jaw set. "Let's show them we're a unit." Just as William was reinforcing the cabin door, a dusty sedan pulled up. It wasn't the sheriff, but Rachel Porter, the only attorney in Stanley who still valued justice over a paycheck. She stepped out, her eyes widening at the sight of the veteran preparing for a standoff. "William, stop," she called out, her voice echoing through the pines. "If you resist the sheriff, they'll have every excuse to take you down." William paused, his powerful hand resting on Smoky's neck. "They're trying to steal the only thing I have left. Rachel, I spent 20 years defending other people's homes. I'm not giving up mine." Rachel walked closer, her gaze softening as she looked at the deep forehead wrinkles and the weariness behind William's moss-green eyes. She pulled a folder from her bag. "I found a loophole. Because this was a classified military site, the town council doesn't actually have jurisdiction. This is federal land oversight territory." William's jaw remained tight, but he listened. Rachel explained that as a veteran with AK-9 operative, he could apply for a historical preservation stewardship. It would buy them time, but the town would fight back dirty. As they spoke, Smoky suddenly looked toward the woods and let out a low, vibrating growl. Someone was watching them from the tree line. The tension is rising. "Do you think Rachel can save William's home?" Type Team William in the comments and subscribe to see what happens next. The person in the woods wasn't a lawyer or a sheriff. It was a scout sent by Harold Burke. William saw the glint of a camera lens through the pine branches. They were looking for any reason to paint William as unstable or dangerous to justify a force. Removal. Smoky's aggressive expression intensified. He was ready to flush the intruder out, but William held him back with a firm stay. William knew the game. If he acted aggressively, he lost. He turned back to Rachel. "Tell me what I need to do." Rachel handed him a stack of federal forms. "Sign these. I'll drive them to the district court myself. But, William, you can't leave this property. If you step off this land, they'll declare it abandoned and bulldoze the cabin before you can get back." William nodded, his moss-green eyes reflecting a grim determination. He was a prisoner on his own $3 empire. He looked at the cabin, the rotting wood, the broken window, and the secrets beneath the floor. It was a high price to pay for a ruin, but it was his ruin. Smoky sat back on his haunches, his fierce posture a silent vow that no one would cross that line while he was on watch. That night, a massive blizzard rolled in, burying the Sawtooth Valley under 2 feet of fresh powder. The power lines to the edge of town failed, plunging Williams clearing into a terrifying, silent whiteout. The temperature plummeted to 15 below zero. Inside the cabin, William huddled near a small wood stove he had rigged up, his muscular frame shivering despite his heavy military coat. Smoky didn't leave his side. The 30-kilogram German shepherd pressed his warm body against William's legs, sharing his heat. The K-9's black and tan coat was thick, but even he felt the bite of the Idaho frost. As the wind shrieked through the cracks in the cabin walls, William began to drift into a memory. The mountains of Afghanistan, the smell of snow and cordite. He felt the phantom weight of his gear, the sound of distant rotors. He jerked awake when Smoky let out a sharp, urgent whine. The dog wasn't cold. He was alert. Through the roar of the blizzard, Smoky had heard something that didn't belong. the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of a heavy vehicle struggling through the snow. They were coming for him under the cover of the storm. William stood up, his joints protesting the cold. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped out onto the porch. The world was a wall of white. Two bright headlights cut through the snow. A heavy-duty bulldozer was crawling up his path, followed by Harold Burke's SUV. They didn't think William would be awake, and they certainly didn't think he could see them, when Harold's voice came through a megaphone, distorted by the wind. "The building is a safety hazard in this storm. We're moving in to clear the site for your own protection." It was a lie, a desperate land grab. William signaled Smoky. The dog leaped into the deep snow, his black and tan form almost invisible in the shadows. Smoky circled behind the bulldozer, while William stood his ground on the porch, his broad shoulders squared, looking like a ghost in the swirling flakes. "Turn around, Harold!" William roared. "I have federal protection pending. You touch this cabin and you're committing a felony." The bulldozer didn't stop. The driver, a hired hand with a nervous face, kept the blade low, but then a sudden metallic snap echoed through the clearing. The bulldozer groaned and lurched to a halt. Smoky had dragged a heavy steel chain from the old bunker and tangled it into the machine's tracks. The K-9 operative had just neutralized the heavy armor. The bulldozer's engine roared in frustration, black smoke billowing into the white storm. But it couldn't move. Smoky's tactical maneuver with the steel chain had worked perfectly. Harold Burke climbed out of his SUV, his expensive leather boots sinking deep into the freezing slush. His face was twisted with rage. "When you're obstructing a city-sanctioned safety operation," he screamed over the wind. William stepped off the porch, his tall, muscular frame moving with deliberate, intimidating slowness. His moss-green eyes were fixed on Harold, and for the first time, the wealthy investor felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the temperature. William didn't carry a weapon, but his presence alone was a deterrent. Smoky emerged from the shadows behind the bulldozer, his black and tan coat dusted with snow, his athletic posture radiating a fierce readiness. "The only thing being obstructed here is your greed, Harold," William said, his voice cutting through the gale like a siren. "The federal authorities have been notified. If that blade touches a single splinter of this wood, you won't just lose your investment, you'll lose your freedom." Harold hesitated, looking at the disabled bulldozer and the terrifyingly calm veteran. He knew he had lost his round, but a look in his eyes promised a much dirtier fight to come. With the bulldozer crew retreating to wait for a tow, the clearing returned to a ghostly silence. William and Smoky retreated inside the cabin, the wind still rattling the boarded-up window. William knew he couldn't just sit and wait anymore. He needed to know exactly what the government had been hiding in the bunker, something more than just mineral charts. He descended the concrete steps once more, his flashlight beam dancing over the reinforced walls. Smoky trotted ahead, his nose twitching. At the far end of the bunker, behind a row of heavy filing cabinets, Smoky began to paw at a section of the floor that sounded hollow. William moved the cabinets aside, his broad shoulders straining with the effort. Beneath them was a second, smaller hatch, secured with a heavy combination lock. Using the clues from the journals he had found earlier, William tried the numbers of his old unit's designation. Click! The lock tumbled. As he swung the heavy lid open, Smoky leaned in, let out a low whine, and then a bark of triumph. Inside weren't just rocks or maps. There were crates of high-grade, refined samples and a set of experimental blueprints for clean energy technology that was decades ahead of its time. The $3 cabin wasn't just sitting on a mine. It was sitting on the future of global energy. William sat on a crate in the dimly lit bunker, the weight of the discovery pressing down on him. This wasn't just local greed anymore. This was a matter of national importance. He realized why the station had been buried and forgotten. It was too valuable to be controlled by any one person or corporation. But as he examined the blueprints, he heard a faint, rhythmic tapping from above. It wasn't the wind. Smoky's ears pinned back. He looked toward the ceiling of the bunker, his aggressive expression returning. Someone was inside the cabin. They hadn't come through the front door. They had slipped in through the broken window, while William was underground. William signaled Smoky to stay quiet. He gripped the handrail of the stairs, his muscular body tensing for an ambush. He moved up the steps without a sound, his moss-green eyes adjusting to the faint light at the top. As he crested the hatch, he saw a dark figure rummaging through his personal bag, looking for the journals. It was a sheriff's deputy, a young man William had once shared coffee with. The betrayal stung more than the cold. "Looking for something, son?" William's voice was like a hammer blow in the quiet room. "Call to action. Betrayal is the ultimate sting. Can William and Smoky trust anyone in this town? Comment loyalty if you stand with Smoky, and subscribe to see how they handle this traitor." The deputy spun around, his hand flying to his holster, but he froze when he saw Smoky's black and tan head emerging from the hatch, teeth bared in a silent, terrifying snarl. William stood tall, his broad shoulders blocking the only exit. "Harold Burke's paycheck must be pretty big for you to break into a veteran's home, kid," William said, his square jaw set in a hard line. The young man's face went pale. "You don't understand, Mr. Wynn. The whole town isn't on it. They think those minerals will bring jobs, money, life back to Stanley. They think you're the only thing standing in the way of prosperity." William took a step forward, his moss-green eyes burning with a mix of pity and anger. "Prosperity built on theft isn't prosperity. It's a crime. Now you're going to leave, and you're going to tell the sheriff that the next person who enters this cabin without a federal warrant isn't coming out." Smoky let out a sharp, aggressive bark, echoing William's threat. The deputy didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled out the door into the freezing night, leaving William and his dog alone with their burden once again. The following morning, the storm had cleared, leaving the Sawtooth Mountains sparkling under a cold, brilliant sun. The silence was broken not by bulldozers or angry neighbors, but by the rhythmic whir of high-end helicopter blades. 3 black helicopters bearing government markings descended into the clearing, their rotors kicking up a blinding cloud of snow. William stood on his porch, his hand resting on Smoky's powerful neck. He knew his time as the sole guardian of the secret was over. A group of men in tactical gear and a woman in a professional suit stepped out. They weren't from the town council, and they didn't look like they took orders from Harold Burke. The woman approached William, showing an ID that confirmed her as an agent from the Department of Energy's Special Recoveries Wing. She looked at the $3 cabin, then at the muscular veteran with the fierce German shepherd. "Mr. Wynn," she said, her voice respectful but firm, "we've been looking for this site for 40 years. It seems your dog has done what our best satellites couldn't." William nodded slowly, his forehead wrinkles relaxing slightly. "He's a K-9 operative," William said, a hint of pride in his low voice. "He knows how to find what's important." The black helicopters remained on the clearing, their engines cooling with a metallic ticking sound. Agent Sarah Vance, the Department of Energy lead, stood in William's tiny cabin, her eyes fixed on the heavy steel hatch. William stood by the door, his muscular frame and broad shoulders casting a shadow over the Federal team. Beside him, Smoky remained in an athletic and fierce posture, his black and tan coat bristling. He didn't trust the suits any more than he trusted the townspeople. "Mr. Wynne, the documents and samples your dog discovered are classified under the National Security Act," Agent Vance stated, her voice professional but cold. "This site is now under federal jurisdiction. We'll be moving you to a secure facility for debriefing." William's square jaw tightened. He looked at the deep forehead wrinkles in the mirror on the wall. The face of a man who had been moved around by the government for 20 years. "I'm not leaving my dog, and I'm not leaving this cabin," William replied, his moss-green eyes locking onto hers. "I bought this land legally. If you want what's underneath it, we talk here." Smoky let out a low, guttural vibration in his chest, reinforcing William's stance. Even the federal agent stepped back, recognizing the bond between a veteran and his K-9 operative. While the federal agents were busy inside the bunker, Harold Burke was watching from the tree lean with binoculars. His face was a mask of desperation. He had invested everything into seizing this land, and now the government was taking it right out from under him. He knew that once the federal government officially cordoned off the area, his chance at the millions was gone forever. Harold turned to a group of rough-looking men he had hired from outside the valley. "The agents are distracted underground," he hissed, his voice trembling with greed. "The veteran and the dog are the only ones on the porch. We take the journals now, or we get nothing." He didn't care about the black helicopters or the federal badges. In his mind, this was still his town. He handed out heavy canisters of industrial-grade tear gas. He planned to flush William and Smoky out, grab the leather-bound records, and vanish before the agents realized what was happening. He forgot that William Wynne had survived ambushes in places Harold couldn't even find on a map. Harold Burke is playing a dangerous game. Do you think Smoky can sense the danger coming? Comment, watch out, and subscribe to see the final showdown. The first sign of trouble wasn't sound, but a shift in Smoky's behavior. The 30 kilograms German shepherd suddenly spun toward the woods, his black and tan tail stiff, his ears pinned forward. His aggressive expression was at its peak. William saw it instantly. He grabbed his old military vest from the truck. "Smoky, alert," he commanded. Suddenly, a canister hissed through the air, landing near the porch and spewing thick, acrid smoke. William didn't panic. He pulled a damp cloth over his face and signaled Smoky. "Flank right, boy." Smoky vanished into the white fog, his powerful muscles propelling him through the snow with terrifying speed. He didn't need to see. He had a nose trained for tracking operatives. Out in the trees, a scream echoed. Smoky had found the first of Burke's hired men. William, using his broad shoulders to shield the cabin entrance, moved toward the source of the noise. His moss-green eyes narrowed against the stinging gas. He wasn't just a veteran anymore. He was a K-9 handler back in the hunt. Inside the tree lean, the scene was chaos for the intruders. They had expected an old man, but they found a black and tan nightmare. Smoky moved like a shadow, appearing from the smoke to deliver a calculated strike before vanishing again. He wasn't drawing blood, per William's silent orders, but his sheer power and fierce posture were enough to break their will. William reached the edge of the clearing just as Harold Burke was trying to scramble back to his SUV. William's powerful hand clamped onto Harold's shoulder like a vice. "The war's over, Harold," William growled, his square jaw inches from the man's terrified face. At that moment, Smoky emerged from the brush. standing over two of the hired men, who were face down in the snow, too terrified to move. The German shepherd's eyes were locked on Harold, a low, warning growl vibrating through the air. The federal agents, alerted by the commotion, surfaced from the bunker with their weapons drawn. The safety operation Harold had dreamed of was now a crime scene, and he was the lead actor in handcuffs. As the smoke cleared and the police arrived to haul Burke and his men away, Agent Vance stood on the porch with William. She looked at Smoky, who was calmly licking a small scratch on his paw, his fierce expression replaced by one of quiet loyalty. "You protected a national asset, Mr. Wynne," she said, her tone much softer than before. "The government is prepared to offer you a permanent position as the civilian supervisor of this site." William looked out at the Sawtooth Mountains, the sun reflecting off his buzz-cut hair, and the deep forehead wrinkles that seemed a bit lighter now. "I don't want a job," he said, looking down at his dog. "I just want a home." Vance smiled faintly. "Then the land stays yours. We will build a state-of-the-art research facility deep underground, but the surface, the cabin in the woods, they belong to you and Smoky, and we'll be paying you a substantial stewardship fee for the rest of your life." William looked at the $3 cabin, the best investment he had ever made. He reached down and scratched Smoky behind the ears. "What do you think, buddy? We staying?" Smoky wagged his tail once, his moss-green-eyed master finally finding peace in the valley that had once mocked them. The arrest of Harold Burke sent shockwaves through the town of Stanley. The man who had promised them wealth through greed was now facing federal charges, while the veteran they had mocked stood as the valley's official guardian. William Wynne didn't gloat. He spent his first stewardship payment not on luxury, but on fixing up the $3 cabin, keeping its original character, but making it strong enough to last another century. The townspeople began to visit, not with greed in their eyes, but with heavy hearts and apologies. The hardware store owner who had refused him service arrived with a truckload of premium cedar, planks and a crate of the finest dog food for Smoky. William accepted them with a silent nod, his moss-green eyes reflecting a quiet forgiveness. He understood that fear often drives people to do things they regret. As he worked on the porch, his broad shoulders moving with steady strength, Smoky sat by his side. The 30 kilograms German shepherd's aggressive expression had softened into one of calm vigilance. He was no longer a stray dog in a shack. He was a local legend of the Sawtooth Mountains. William realized that the mini cabin was now more than a home. It was a beacon. Other veterans, hearing the story of the man and the K-9 who held their ground against a whole town, began to find their way to his door. They came looking for advice, for a quiet place to heal, or just to meet Smoky. William, with his military buzz cut and salt and pepper beard, welcomed them all. He decided to use a portion of his land to build small, sustainable shelters for veterans in transition, a project he called Smoky's Overwatch. It wasn't about the rare minerals underground anymore. It was about the gold and the human spirit. William's square jaw would often break into a rare smile as he watched former soldiers sitting around a fire pit, sharing stories while Smoky moved among them, offering a silent, furry comfort. The deep forehead wrinkles on William's face began to look less like scars of war and more like a map of a life well lived. The Department of Energy completed the underground research facility months later. It was invisible from the surface, hidden beneath the very floorboard Smoky had first scratched. The scientists and agents moved in and out through a concealed entrance far down the road, leaving William's clearing in peace. Agent Vance visited one last time to present William and Smoky with a special commendation. It was a bronze plaque to be mounted on a rock near the cabin. It didn't mention the minerals or the clean energy blueprints. Instead, it bore the image of a German shepherd in a fierce posture and a veteran with broad shoulders. The inscription read, "For William Wynne and Smoky, who taught us that the greatest discoveries are found through loyalty, not greed." William ran his callous fingers over the bronze, his moss-green eyes misting over for a moment. He thought about his last $3 and how they had bought him a purpose he thought he had lost forever. William and Smoky's journey shows that it's never too late for a new beginning. If the story touched your soul, leave a red heart in the comments and make sure to subscribe for our next big adventure. Years passed, and the story of the $3 cabin became a piece of Idaho folklore. William grew older, his salt and pepper hair turning fully silver, but his tall frame remained muscular and upright. He was a grandfather of the valley, a man of few words but infinite wisdom. Smoky, too, felt the years in his joints, but his black and tan coat remained well-groomed, and his loyalty never wavered. Every evening at sunset, when the Sawtooth Mountains turned a deep crimson, the two would sit on the porch of the $3 cabin. William would rest his hand on Smoky's head, feeling the steady heartbeat of his best friend. They would watch the lights of Stanley flicker in the distance, a town that was now a community of support rather than a nest of judgment. They had defended their perimeter, secured their future, and transformed a rotting shack into a sanctuary. The wind still howled off the peaks, but inside the cabin, it was always warm. As the final scene fades in, we see a wide shot of the Sawtooth Mountains. The camera pans down to the small cabin, now surrounded by a lush garden and several other neat, small homes for veterans. A young man in an army jacket, looking lost and tired, walks up the gravel path. He stops at the gate, hesitating. Suddenly, a powerful German shepherd, a descendant of Smoky, trots out to meet him, tail wagging in a welcoming but firm manner. From the porch, a tall man with moss-green eyes and a square jaw stands up, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the rising sun. "You're home, The Channel, son. The Dog, and the Veteran is a storytelling platform created for entertainment, inspiration, education, and the promotion of positive emotional values. All stories presented on this channel are fictional and are creatively developed based on themes such as courage, loyalty, resilience, and the special bond between veterans and their dogs. The content does not represent real individuals, actual events, or documented cases. Any resemblance to real people, animals, or events is purely coincidental.